So I'm really excited about our next keynote speaker. I got to meet Harsh in the way I'm kind of known to meet people. We were at an event, and Harsh and I and Terry Angelos and Angela Strange shut down the bar in New York. And but it was really like Terry and Angela are pretty geeky people, if you think about it. And Angela's over here too, so I can call her a geek. But Harsh and I were just like locked in at the end of this bar with some old fashions, just going back and forth. And obviously I was right and he was right for some certain reason. But it really became a friendship, and I really respect him and what he's built at Wise. So a little bit about Wise. Harsh joined Wise in 2015. Now they serve 12 million customers and process 156 billion in cross-border payments every year. So that's a lot. And before Wise, Harsh led mobile at PayPal. He's been in this industry for a long time. I asked him to come present today, not just because he's incredible at payments, but I really, really respect the engineering culture that he's developed as the CTO of Wise. I think we can all learn a lot from how he treats people and how he takes on technologies. So help me introduce Harsh to the table.
Hello, folks. It's actually an honor to be here, a massive honor, in a room with builders and those who actually live and breathe payments every day. So as Wade said, I'm Harsh. I've been in the industry for about 22 years at the intersection of commerce and payments, previously at eBay and PayPal, and then for the last decade, I've been building Wise. And when Wade asked me to do this talk, we discussed what we should cover, and we agreed that we'll cover a bit more on the tech, but also on overall what it means to build a network which is trying to build a better way to move money around the world, which means also what kind of organization and what kind of culture you build. Wade actually, I did not know he was going to do this. He already covered a bit about Wise. So yeah, we move about $150 billion in cross-currency volume now across the world on this network we've built. But if you look at same currency volume, we move about over $500 billion. And we have our sights now on $1 trillion pretty easy. I can give you, I still remember the day when in 2016, I think, we celebrated moving $1 billion a year. So that's the growth curve we've gone through and the systems that we've built. But enough context about Wise. What I'm going to talk about today is basically the fundamental principles on which we've built Wise and how we work, the tech choices we've made, some of the tech challenges we'd had to go through, because you'll see this is not a simple problem that we had to solve, and some of the fundamental assumptions we had to slay, I guess. So my talk is going to be mainly about first principles thinking and how you apply first principles thinking to different parts of solving a problem. And then also about how we apply that first principles thinking to tech, but also to product engineering and to people and culture. So first of all, how many people here know about Wise? Okay. Let the record show about 45%, I think. When we started building Wise, one of the bigger problems was there was an existing way to move money around the world. So for first principles thinking, I'm guessing most people know what first principles means. A quick bit is it's a way of problem-solving method that involves breaking the complex problems and systems into the component parts, and then basically looking at every assumption, and then going back to build a solution on working through backwards from the assumptions to the actual fundamental truths, and then working from there. So I'll work this through how this applied in the sense of Wise. And then, as I said, I also learned over the last 10 years that as techies in the room and engineers in the room, we tend to put everything in as a technical problem, we can solve it. But I've realized much more in the last 10 years than the past roles before that to build Wise and to build this infrastructure, it actually required a lot of work around product engineering and people and culture too, and first principles approach taken there. So again, a quick poll. How many of you have ever done a cross-border money movement or transfer? Okay, so about 35%. How many of you used your bank? Okay, yeah, quite a bit. All right. So those of you who used your bank, I was one of them, right? So I moved from India to San Francisco Bay Area for my grad school, and I moved my first semester tuition. And I paid 8% in fees to move that first semester tuition from INR to USD. That's quite a bit, if you think about it. This was like 2003. And the problem in cross-border payments has actually been the same for the longest time. Like, the traditional rails have been pretty slow, pretty expensive, and actually the product is pretty hard to use and difficult to navigate. You usually don't know how much the recipient will get, when the money will arrive on the other side, and there's a whole bunch of other problems. But what's amazing to me is that this system has been around for the last 60 years, and we're still using the same system. And these problems have been around for that long. So I've always said, fundamentally, Wise should not exist. Because the company, we started this around 2011, 2012. And what else was happening at that time? So my 7-year-old is a big fan of Legos, like most 7-year-olds, I guess. And like Legos are designed in Sweden, like the supply contracts go to China, they're manufactured. Somehow all this process and supply chain works, where everything, including the shipment of the Lego to my son and to our doorstep in Austin, Texas, is tracked. So a physical item can be tracked all over around the world with barcodes being scanned along the way. And we know where the Lego is. But somehow, with bits and bytes, which is money, but money is just bits and bytes moving through the system, and a bunch of databases and networks, we can't tell you when the money is going to arrive on the other side. That's one of the big problems with cross-border payments. And it's always amazing to me that it's needed so much time for us to come to this part where we can now predict when the money is going to hit your account on the other side of the planet. So why is this so hard? Well, the truth is, there are some complicated structural issues at play here. One, there is this thing called correspondent banking. How many people know correspondent banking? Okay. So I'll cover this a bit more. But basically, the way money moves across the world. So let's say you go to your Bank of America account today, and you want to send money to your friend in Australia. I guess in this example, it's going from Australia to UK. But it's the same process. You go to your bank, you tell them, I want to move $1,000, in this case, 1,000 Australian dollars to the UK. And what happens is, your bank probably has not got an account or a correspondent set up at their own branch in the UK. So they will use a series of banks to move the money around the world, and they have contracts with them. As you can imagine, the more middlemen you have, the more chance of there being issues. There are fees in the middle, there is speed issues, but there's also issues around every bank along the chain has to do their own checks on compliance and regulatory requirements and fin-crime and fraud checks, and they will ask questions back to the originating bank. So that is what leads to this structurally inefficient way to move money around the world. And that leads to slowness and higher fees. How many people have heard of SWIFT? So newsflash, if you don't know, SWIFT is actually just a messaging system. It's not a system to move money. So what you do is when you go and do a transaction at your bank, the bank fires a message on the SWIFT system, but the settlement cycles and everything is actually going to go through that correspondent chain, which means every bank's own processes have to kick off for your money to move from one step to the other, which could include some banks may having single-day clearing, some may have intraday clearing, some may have two-day clearings in some countries. There's another problem. There's a lot of hidden fees. So as I said, there's middlemen that leads to higher fees, but also a lot of the fees actually you don't know what you're paying for. Talking about fees, how many people, when you do a wire in the US, anybody want to guess how much is the cost of, let's say, I hope there's nobody from Chase here, but take any bank, a Chase or, oh no, JP Morgan's here, sorry. So Bank of America. But any bank actually, the retail side of stuff, how much does it cost the bank to do a Fed wire transaction that the Federal Reserve charges them? Any guesses? Sorry, is it louder? 5 cents, actually good answer. It's actually 15 cents. Pretty close. But how much do retail customers pay? $40. That's the markup, right? In some places, you might be paying $25. But the problem in cross-border payments is even bigger. It's actually twofold. One is you might be paying a fee, which is very high markup, and which is shown to you. But the second part is you might be paying a fee that you don't even know, which is in the exchange rates. And there is no central body, really, to have an exchange rate set up, other than where would you go to check the exchange rate for USD to USD to INR? You'd probably go to Google. And Google's actually pretty good. They're pretty right. They say there's a spread, there's a bid and an ask, and what's in the middle is the mid-market rate. And that truly should be the rate at which you do your transaction. And then you should see the fees transparently. But that's a structural problem also in the industry, because there is so much hidden fees. You really don't know how much you're paying, so you can't compare providers. And in 2025, we expect US residents to lose about $20 billion in hidden fees just in cross-border payments. And the third problem is very interesting. It's actually a very big structural problem, which is there's a governance vacuum. So what do I mean by that? There is no central body that governs cross-border payments in the world. You can't go to an association and lobby to have faster payments in cross-border payments. You can do that in the US and go to Congress and say, I want to have FedNow and RTP, and that adoption takes years, but at least you can do that, right? That's happened in domestic payment systems across the world, but there is no place to go in cross-border payments, which means fundamentally it's all driven by these various economic factors of higher fees, quality of service being different in different countries, but it doesn't matter because who are you going to go complain to? And then also, every country has a different set of payment regulations. India cares a lot about certain types of regulations, about like how much foreign currency you can hold, because it also leads to devaluation of their currency. Brazil may have some other worries about taxes in this, while the UK and US may have different reasons. So every country and every payment system that exists has their own issues around own requirements that you have to meet. So we take all of that together. If you're connecting to local payment systems to move money around the world, all of these payment systems have a different interface, a different API, a different way to interact, and different compliance requirements. So now, I love Visa and MasterCard, because I'm like, you give me one API, and it actually works? And you give me 2-second, 3-second, response times, and I have a settlement file, which looks very big, and it's very hard to sometimes work through, but it works. This was the problem that we had, right? So we had to take a step back and say, if we really want to solve this problem, we have to fundamentally try and build a different infrastructure to move the world's money. It can't be the same infrastructure, because it has got all these problems, which went back to the first principles thinking. So we had to take a step back and go, okay, in 2012, 13, 15, whatever, what would it look like if we were to build cross-border payments from scratch, if it never existed, if correspondent banking never existed? What would it look like? What would good look like now? Well, this is what good looks like with correspondent banking. You have coverage, but it depends on which routes you're moving money to. The fees can be pretty high. It's unclear, as I said, like how much you're paying, and the speed can be 2 to 4 days. But what we really think we deserve as humanity, if you're doing cross-border payments, is this. You want things to work everywhere. Speed should be instant, and it should be pretty cheap. As I said, it's really bits and bytes moving across databases. It's not really somebody's moving cash in a Boeing 747. So then, the mission looked right. The outcomes looked right. But then how do you go solving this? The problems add up pretty quickly. So where do you even start? And this is where, over the last 10 years, I realized it is a combination of these 3 pillars that has helped us get this far. So I'm going to talk about each of these and what these mean. So on the tech side, let's go through some examples. So as I said, cross-border payments done through correspondent banking looks like this. So there's a pretty simple solve to start with, which we did start with, which was, let's open a bank account in every country. So then, if you are coming to Wise and you create a transfer, you can say, I want to move money from Australia to UK. Hey, I have an account in Australia. The domestic payment system is actually pretty good. It runs everybody's payroll. It runs all the business in the country. It's battle-tested. You move money through that account to me, and once I see it, my algorithm will link your transfer into your transfer you created, link your funds. Once I see the funds, I push it to the other side with my bank account in the UK. Worked pretty well. So we've taken the step from maybe 4 or 5 correspondents to like two accounts, both of sides Wise. What happens with this is we can also control the end-to-end experience. So we know all the FinCrime checks we need to do. There's only one correspondent really in the middle. That's us. We can also control, and we know the prediction of like local payment systems cutoff time. So we know when the money will arrive on the other side, how much treasury and liquidity we have. And that was the insight which led to us starting to build this infrastructure by connecting to local payment systems across the world. And we got pretty far. But around 2017, we went back to first principles and we started asking, why do we have to use bank partners? I'm still paying fees. Why do I have to pay Barclays in the UK X pounds per transaction? So then we said, well, I can't go directly to Bank of England and bank with them. Well, why not? So that started this discussion in the company where we was like, we need to get direct access. And that started this journey of starting to talk to anybody who would listen to us to get a direct settlement account with the Bank of England and access to the faster payment scheme. Because we are not a bank, we're a payment service provider, like we're a PSP. And we don't need to be a bank to provide cross-border services. But then it required this drive and this push to first think about what is the thing that would get us to bare bones pricing and amazing instant payments. And that was this direct access. So in 2018, we did our first transaction. We did get the laws changed. We did our first transaction on FPS, and then we were up and running. And what that did was amazing for the industry, because our initial pitch to the Bank of England was, hey, right now in the UK, you've got about 10 banks, and they are holding this payment system captive. And it's actually a public utility, but they're extracting all the economic value, and they're not passing it back to consumers, the citizens of the country. You need to create more competition. Since we got that access, and there were a lot of reasons why people said, you should not get this access because you're a fintech, you are not a bank, you don't have the same risk compliance procedures and all that stuff. So we had to prove ourselves along the way. In fact, including getting engineers in front of bankers, central bankers. By the way, all engineers should be in front of central bankers. I think that really drives home how strong the team is. So our engineering team actually presents a lot to central banks. And it actually, experts want to talk to experts, not to I see a few people laughing, but it does drive credibility if you can do that. But after we got integrated, the price of cross-border payments started going down in the UK. Because more competition, once you open the door, there's more competition that came in. There's now 30 players in the UK who are not banks and directly integrated. But it started all from first principles of what do we need to do to get to this point, to get this access and get these payments being much cheaper. And now we're connected to 6 different payment systems. So we took that model, and then we went and sold it to Australia and said, hey, by the way, Australia, you love the UK. See what they've done. You should try and see if we can do the same. And then we went across the world and did similar things in other places. We're still working on the US. It's much slower, but hopefully one day we will get there. But what does this mean from a technology perspective, too? It actually brings a lot of complications. So there are certain rules. These payment systems have been built to be domestic. They never were built to do international transactions. So you're doing a transaction, one leg of the international transaction domestically, that's what we use it for. But then there are fundamental requirements, like you have to deploy data centers in each of these countries. So guess what? Right now, we're in over 80 countries, and our ambition is to be directly connected to every country, so we'll deploy 80 different data centers, but also not one. You have to deploy redundancy, so you usually have to deploy 2 or 3. You have to have local regs, local security requirements, local data processing. Some countries, especially in Asia, do not want citizen data to be leaving the country. So you have to hash the data out. And there will be certain things that will allow you to take it out, but processing of certain data has to be done in the country. So it comes with a lot of requirements and a lot of local requirements to do this just at the scheme level. But then also in the experience level. So this is, I'm sure most of you know this, since we're in the US, this is what a recipient creation form looks like. If you want to send money to somebody using ACH, you give a name, account number, and what type of account it is and routing number. But then this is what it looks like in Brazil. Kind of similar, but look at the last field. It is a tax ID number. So imagine if you were asked to provide your social security number every time you had to receive money. That's what the recipient is asked in Brazil. Right? That's the law. But God forsake if you're sending money to Japan. I can't write in kanji, but this is what you have to do. You have to actually write the name both in English and in Japanese or in kanji. So there's quite a bit of, and not a lot of Googling can help you. There's still errors. So there's quite a lot of nuance in building this from a cross-border payments experience, even which is above the rails. So one of the solutions that we had, because there's a big problem here, where every time we needed to launch a new route, whether it was for our own apps or our iOS, Android web experience, or even now we have big banks who run on Wise and use our correspondent network, so that's the Wise platform business. They would all have to actually go and either hard code this experience, or they wanted something else. But the problem was, in some places you have to hard code it. What we came up with this was a simple, well, not simple enough. I wish it was simpler, but a requirements API, which basically says, given a set of root, or it could be a verification requirement, like what kind of ID you need to basically open an account, send me that API call, and I'll give you all the requirements. Now, this is for a South Korea payment, like what an account number should look like, but it'll give you back everything, including the regex, including the validation requirements, and now you can basically, this is JSON schema that you can just embed and interpret and then like build your application on. Once you do this integration once, it's a heavy lift in the beginning. Adding new roots is like, every time we add a new root, everybody gets it. And it's the implementation is the same. So this was one of the things that we built early on. It has its own challenges, but like this really helped us scale. And if you ever have this pattern where you have to like build once and then roll out as you add new requirements, this could be one pattern that you could use. So what it looks like for the ACH forms now, like it has validation like, hey, routing number's not right, not enough, the validation is not working, stuff like that. But basically over time, what we realized was, if you go back before the internet, before TCP/IP was around, basically all these networks spoke to each other and their own language. And basically building Wise feels like this now. We are basically taking every specific requirements from local payment networks in every country and then translating that into a standardized format, that is our format, and basically making sure that everything complies and the networks can talk to each other. Well, if that was not even challenging enough, other things happen. The last few years have been pretty high on turmoil for a lot of reasons. And actually, anytime something big happens in the world, cross-border payments gets impacted. Like money flows start changing. Like exchange rates move around, so stock markets get impacted, but also we can see how much people are starting to transact across the world and imbalances in things happening. When wars break out, when elections happen. So I'll give you an example of this. When the Ukrainian war started, this is the growth of entries into global sanctions lists for just Russian entities in 2 months. Now, I don't know how many people have worked in sanctions. Is there anybody? Okay, so there's some people who are nodding and they're already smiling. Like, this was tough, right? Because sanctions by itself is a no-compromise regime. You cannot make a mistake, else you'll get fined. And sanctions data by itself is always incomplete. In fact, there are actually quite a few, after this thing happened, quite a few ships that were run by Russian oil companies, they started renaming their entire vessel base with names like Fred, Bob, and like other names so that they would start avoiding some of the sanctions hits in like, engines which may be not as sophisticated. Why am I telling you all this? Learning basically for us has been, when you're building a network across this many payment systems, and like the TCP/IP analogy I gave, as engineers, we love to believe, oh, do not repeat yourself, have tight interfaces, amazing constraints. Actually, what's worked out for us is like speed of change is key, and flexibility in everything you build has to be there. Because everything you think about today is going to change in 3 or 4 months, especially in the world we live in right now, right? Like, and it may only move in pockets, but I'll give you one more example. The Brazilian government decided 3 months ago that the taxes on international transfers, they charge a tax called IOF tax, will change within 3 days. 3 days. For the whole citizens, the entire country, will go from 1.5% to 3%. And that meant changing all systems, and that flexibility is super important, otherwise you'll be violating tax code. Give you another example. This was actually an incident that happened about 8 or 9 years ago, 7 years ago, around deduplication. So we had it involves a partner in Australia. This is when we were not directly connected, so we were using a bank partner. And they were actually one of the good ones. They provided us a unique ID and a stable ID for every transaction. So first line of defense, it looked like this, right? This looks so nice, right? Bank transaction ID looks very nice. It's from a bank. It's a transaction ID. It should be unique. You've told me it's unique. And our first line of defense was pretty simple. We had a uniqueness check on this transaction. So every time we would pull transactions from this bank, they would send us all the settlement files or the transaction files. We would run the logic, which was to check for uniqueness. Logic was simple, fast, and we just checked if the ID already existed. No fuzzy logic needed, nothing. Until one morning, they decided to change the unique format and added a B in front of it. That was a change. And guess what? They're in Australia. Most of our processing is happening in the UK, and the team's asleep. And these transactions now are coming in, and our network moves money around the world 24/7. They realize that this happened. They send us the email and say, we are rolling it back. And they roll it back to this. And they resent all the transactions that were sent with the B. So now I have duplicate transactions. So now I've got twice the amount of money movement being shown in my system for the number of transfers that have been created through Australia. And then they said, well, that was probably a mistake, because now we understand this is a problem, so they rolled it back again. So we had now triple imports. Obviously, we have on-call and stuff, so the way we found out, just being honest, is we had some very good customers who called in and said, hey, Wise, you paid me out twice. Do you want $10,000 back? And we're like, oh, what? That's not happened before. And then CS started getting some of these phone calls, so we raised an incident. And then the engineers started looking at it, and they're like, well, this transaction is showing up twice. So we literally shut down Wise. We did all payouts stop, because we don't know what's the problem, right? But something's wrong. And for 8 hours, Wise was not doing payouts at all, right? Now, we were also lucky we were much smaller. But then this taught a very big lesson for us, which is like, do not trust your partners. So what did we build post that? So we did this, we still have the deduplication logic, right? So the bank statement comes in, we pass the bank statement, and we use the predicate, which is a firm predicate of saying there's a strict primary check if you give me one, right? But then we built the yin and the yang. The yang on the yin was, we have something called a double import probe. And it is founded on the principle that you can never fully trust your partner's unique ID. And its design is the philosophical opposite of a primary check. So it deliberately uses a different looser set of fields, a composite key, that can combine things like, this is just an example, there's a lot more sophistication in this now, but it could be debtor name, transaction ID, amount, reference, and then it looks at sliding windows. Because we also know in some settlement files and some implementations in some schemes, weekends can cause delays. Right? You may see processing of transactions coming in, but actually money arrives a little bit later. So we had to use a sliding window too. But this check is expensive. It's not. The beauty of the transaction ID check was it was unique. It was very easy to implement. There's a lot of transactions coming in. It's very, very easy to run this through a database and do a quick hit. This is much more complicated, much more heavier query to do. So then what we do is we use this as a circuit breaker. So it doesn't look at all the transactions in the file, but basically, or every single transactions, but it basically uses a sliding window and does a sampling. And if we hit a certain threshold, let's say 10% or 8%, pick a number, then it basically quarantines the entire transaction, entire import, into a manual review. Last year, this system has saved $150 million in incorrect imports. Sounds crazy, right? But this is the reality when you're building something like this, where you're working across so many bank partners and so many different processes. Mistakes do happen. And as I said, do not trust your partner completely all the time. Last one I'll give you an example on the tech side is a delivery estimator. So as I said before, one of the challenges in cross-border payments is that you don't know when your money is going to arrive on the other side. And actually, it's a very big challenge because it creates a lot of anxiety for customers. Imagine if you're trying to pay for a hospital bill across the world, and you really don't know when the money is going to hit, and somebody's waiting for surgery. It creates not only anxiety for customers, it creates a lot of customer support phone calls. It's just a bad experience. But it's an amazing engineering problem. It's an amazing engineering and data science problem. And as our network grew, we were like, oh my God, look at how much data we have across the world on all these routes we run. To give you context, last year, Wise moved 10% of all the money that moves into India on the consumer side. So India is one of the biggest routes in the world. It gets about $100 billion into the country for consumers, and we move 10 of that, 10 billion, right? So that's a lot of data. So we know, cutoff times for different banks. We know delivery speed of last mile pushes. We know when the treasury and liquidity movements happen. So I was like, oh my God, this is data science. This is awesome. Let's build a back-tested machine learning model on it. So that's what we did. We did we built a model, which was a sophisticated predictive model. It ingested historical settlement data, running a multivariate analysis on a whole bunch of things, including payment timings on currency corridors, clearing channels, day of week, even hour of the day. And we backtested the heck out of it. And it achieved 80% accuracy. It's pretty good, like better than the current system that exists with banks. But then the model was built on this fatal assumption that the future would behave more or less like the past. And one Tuesday afternoon, a large corporate batch to India hit an unforeseen liquidity issue. So it didn't clear for 24 hours. And that entire batch of thousands of payments got stuck and got delayed. And guess what? That fed into the model, right? So now suddenly the model's like, on a Tuesday at 2 p.m., things seem to be a little wonky. So let's give bad estimates, right? And guess what? We had also domestic payment schemes. They are under pressure to continue to move faster. So they are adding weekend settlement in some places. They're adding faster, more cutoff times. So all of that feedback testing, the loop was too slow for the model to catch up. So the model started working against our requirements. We wanted to build this world of instant payments. And we were actually delivering these payments instantly on the other side. But all our customers were being told when the model was live, once these things started happening, with the drift that was happening, that, hey, your money will get there in 2 to 4 days. So we exactly got to the same place where everybody else was for the last 60 years. So what did we do? We basically threw out the machine learning model. We basically replaced it with a deterministic engine, where all the learnings that we've had over the last few years on cutoff times, payment times, and treasury movements, we know all that, and we can actually have a clear path of saying, from here to here, how much time will the money take to move? It's basically a graph database, and it works pretty well. It does require relentless auditing and testing of the data every quarter, but it's an operational cost, which we can run through. But it buys us certainty, and the result is that it gives us 98% accuracy now. So if you go to wise.com, and you put in, I want to move money from USD to INR, and we will tell you, it's going to reach on Tuesday at 2 p.m., it'll get there. 98% accuracy, it'll get there before Tuesday at 2 p.m., right? Within 10 minutes, actually. So all of this leads me to say there is a lot of fundamental assumptions. And one thing I've learned is everything will break, right? It will break, no matter what. So I should ask you all are building different things. And what is the fundamental assumption that you've had? And is it flawed? Is it changing? And some of those assumptions, when was the last time you checked it? Because as a bank transaction ID says, they will tell me contractually too, it's unique. And they even showed me they could show you the column that is unique, but then somebody's going to make a change somewhere. So that's one of the bits on tech, on what has been the journey for us in the last 10 years. But I'll move on to product engineering. So what is product engineering? So my entire team is called product engineers. They're not just called engineers. And it means they aren't just the ones building the technical systems. They obviously have to do that. And these systems power our network and our products, but they have to go beyond that. And this is not something you'd expect to hear from a CTO, but the true impact of engineers in a company like ours, and I think in most companies, in most fintechs, and most businesses, isn't writing code. The real value is understanding the customer, the product, and the market, and figuring out how to remove roadblocks. And every line of code you're writing, you're building something, or you're removing a roadblock or an excuse to get something out there. And these roadblocks could be technical, majority of the other times they are, but also it could be regulatory or cultural. And this thinking fundamentally changes how people behave. So in our teams, we fundamentally require engineering leaders and engineers to take end-to-end ownership of the customer problem. And we organize the teams in that way. And this leads to a few magical things. Smaller teams, usually. Faster iteration cycles. If you can just give me a requirement, and it's already half, I don't have big PRDs needed because the engineer already understands the customer problem and he started writing the code, right? So there's a lot of fluff we take out by just having engineers be closer to customers. And also, it's just more efficient. That means like iteration cycles are faster because the engineers are also looking at the data on the customer usage of the product and then iterating the product faster. But what does it really mean? So there's two things I would boil it down to. One is, for any problem that you're working on as a product engineer, the problem may look very big holistically, but you have to break them down into smaller components and then work them through while keeping the longer story alive and seeing how every change you're doing is impacting the customer data. So I'll give you an example. We start with the customer problem first, and then break them down into tiny pieces, and then chip away step by step. This is Singapore. So we had prided ourselves in building a product where you can onboard to it by, digital IDs. You didn't have to go to a bank to do a cross-border payments. You download the Wise app, you show your ID, your passport, just like you would check into an international flight. We verify you. We have a lot of telemetry on the phones that we can tell you are who you say you are and you are where you say you are. And we were very proud of this. And this product worked really well. And then our next destination in 2017 was Singapore. And then we went to Singapore. We had a big wait list of people who had already told us they want us there. And the Singapore Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is a very good regulator, very data-driven regulator, said, you cannot do this. You can't do ID verification online. There's so much fraud. So you need to do in-person. It completely breaks the business model, right? Like, I've never had an in-person place other than the offices we work in. Now you're saying you have to have customers come in person? So we had a team of 6 people on this, including bankers, engineers, product. And this went back and forth with the Monetary Authority of Singapore for a long time, saying, hey, here's all the data. We've been doing this in the UK for a long, long time, and it's a bigger country than yours, and basically, this is working fine. Here's the data on fraud. We shared a lot of data with them. The good thing we saw was they were very receptive to looking at the data, but they said, no, the law is the law. And it kind of makes sense too, right? Singapore is a small island country. You pretty much, local transit works. So if you had to really go to open an account once, show your face in person at a branch, kind of makes sense on why they had this requirement. But the fundamental assumption they had was, if you don't do this, there's going to be more fraud. And then I still remember there was a hack that the team created. They said, all right, we do want to launch in Singapore. And we don't have to do this everywhere. But creating a reservation system, once you've verified your ID, to do an appointment, it's not that much, 2 weeks of work. So what we ended up doing was we moved Jack, literally his name, from Tallinn, Estonia, to Singapore. We put him in a WeWork, and his entire job was to put in a calendar his availability from Monday to Thursday. Every customer we onboarded, we'd already verified all their IDs, but they would have to come to our location and show Jack the ID. And he would stamp it, sign it, take a picture of it, upload it, done, right? That was one way product engineers solved this problem, which is like, cool, we got to get this live, get this product in the hand of the customers, and then we will see what we can do with the Monetary Authority of Singapore. 6 months in, we took all the data, we went back to Mass and said, here's the data. Guess what? There's no difference in the fraud rates, and I'm doing more servicing in Europe and UK than in Singapore. Fraud rates are the same. Laws changed. But it required somebody to come up with this desire and enter ownership to push to say, we can do this, and for now, we have to take this step because we've hit an impasse. The second one, I would say, is being a product engineer means thinking like an owner. I talked about direct access to payment systems. So once we did our first integration in the UK, we had our next eyes set on Europe. But then Europe is a lot of countries, so where do you start? And one of the things was, it's kind of pretty cool. We had all these teams working on different parts of Europe, in Australia, in the UK, and they care about the customer experience the most, and they have metrics on how many new customers are joining Wise. The engineering lead for Hungary, he was like, I think Eastern Europe, but he lived in Hungary, he said, I need to win. So he was like, I need to get this fees in Hungary down. I need to be the first in Europe to start getting access to the direct payment system, direct access to the payment system. So obviously what he did was, like any other engineer, picked up the phone and called the central bank. Of course, he did not do that. He didn't do that. But what he did do was actually figure out a conference like this where he could meet central bankers, and he started pitching them. He started saying, you guys have the opportunity to be the first in Europe to open up direct access to non-banks. And guess what? The UK has already done it. It's been going on for 3 years. And this is the data on this. Remember how I said engineers talking to central bankers is good? It was very good in this case. Because in about 6 weeks, we had a note from the central bank saying, hey, we are really interested in what you've done in the UK, and we would like to have collaborative talks into how to open up the Hungarian payment system for non-banks to create more competition. But it actually required somebody local taking ownership as an engineering or product leader and going to the central bank teams and explaining why the problem is worthwhile working through for them. Cool. So, but the key bit here was still working on first principles, which was for him to grow Wise and to grow the user base. This was a key lever to pull. And if without that, that would not work, where he could drop fees and make payments instant. By the way, this engineering leader now runs our North America business. So tech, the challenges we faced, product engineering, how to build a culture and create an end-to-end ownership and the outcomes you can get from that. But also the third bit is people and culture and how we are set up. So Wise is a very unique product in the sense that it is very global, right? A lot of you are probably building products for US users, and you understand the user mindset of US customers because you probably live and breathe it. You probably, if you're building a card product with rewards, as Matt was talking about today morning, most of you probably have local reward cards. You understand what the problem is, right? But for building truly something like this, which is a global product, it is very hard for you to think about all the use cases and all the nuances in different parts of the world. But also the way we are set up is we have over 100 product teams running in parallel. And we don't do top-down planning. What we do is we require all product teams to have their own missions and visions of like what they want to achieve. So who is their customer? Example was the Hungarian team, which was looking to grow the Hungarian user base. And what is the KPI or North Star metric that you're going to move? And all your planning and all your resourcing has to be public inside the company. So anybody can challenge you at any point to see, is it worthwhile doing X versus Y? And then we can track. So 100 parallel product teams, and they're solving these customer problems. The reason to be set up like this is basically going back to the first principles of speed. As a startup, especially when we were, and we still believe and think like a startup, if I can put in more experiments in production and move faster and more product features live than you, and have the data set to iterate through that, theoretically I should win. So having more parallelism helps us with that speed. And actually, what I've learned over the last 10 years is sitting in an executive room and pontificating on what is the next trend that a customer will use and which will break through is BS, because you can't. So then you empower these small product teams who are closest to the customer, who are listening to the customer, to understand what they want to build and build that product and ship it. I'll give you an example of what this led to. So how many people have heard of the company called TransferWise? Okay, you know that is also Wise, right? Like we were TransferWise before, right? So we used to be TransferWise, and then we stopped doing transfers because we did more. But when we did more, we built this. This is a global account. This is truly the one account you should need, and I use this, so I can say that because I travel a lot. If you are transacting and traveling anywhere in multiple currencies in multiple countries. 40 different currencies, a smart debit card, spend it wherever you want, you get the same low rates and exchange rates that you see on Google, and same fees, low fees, right? This wasn't built to be a global bank account. This was built to solve a problem that a product manager and an engineering leader had. They had this problem of high amount customers. So people who were transacting, say, more than $100,000, they had a very poor experience on Wise. Because what was happening was they would come to Wise and they would say, I want to move 100,000 pounds or $100,000 to Australia or to India. And then they would be stuck with the limits in the local payment system. Because if you want to move then that transaction from your Bank of America account or your or Barclays account to Wise's account, there are different limits and different checks that are happening, and things slow down. So the speed of payments once the money was in Wise was super fast, and customers really loved it. But the challenge was the time it was taking and the headache of getting that payment from the actual domestic bank into Wise. So they started building this, saying hey, we should try and figure out a way that these customers who really want to use us for high-value transactions can actually just hold money in Wise. What started that with that insight, which nobody else in the executive leadership team had, led to now this product being available across 80 countries. It holds $25 billion in assets. It gives you trading, it gives you investments, and basically it is the fastest part of our product. And this goes back to having local empowered teams where decision-making is happening in the nodes, leads to And they're solving problems on first principles. Leads to like amazing outcomes happening, which you didn't even think about. And then that leads to, like, for us at least, it's meant having a very diverse team across multiple locations, which basically understands the customer problem in that location. I always say this, like previously I used to be in the Valley with eBay and PayPal, and we always be like, why don't Germans use credit cards? Like, I don't know if there are any Germans in the audience. Okay, why don't Germans use credit cards? Exactly. It required us to hire a German to figure that out in eBay, like 9 months in. But we were like sitting there going like, oh my God, why is credit card usage so low when as checkouts method, but like everywhere else is growing? And we are doing all these optimizations and conversion techniques and changes. No, Germans don't like taking loans. Like, freaking did not know, man. We're sitting in San Jose. We lost 9 months, right? But this is just one example, a simple one. But I've seen building this product across the world that local teams, you can't sit in San Jose or you can't sit in Denver, Colorado, and understand how QR code payments are completely destroying anything else as a payment method in Asia. Unless you live it and breathe it, you will not know. So this is another fundamental foundational principle on which we've built Wise, which is, hey, it's not just about the tech and the product engineering experience, but also how you set up the people and the culture to have these distributed teams with different backgrounds, and also meeting the customers where their experience is. Because fundamentally, I believe that payments is not a global business. It's a local business. In every jurisdiction, payments is different. And if you don't meet the customers where you are, you will lose. So a decade ago, we did not really know what good would look like in cross-border payments and what it would take to build a global infrastructure. And it had never been built like this before, right? So there was no roadmap. But I realize now, looking back, that through each phase, with each direct connection, each new launch of a new product, we had to go back and break down our fundamental assumptions and break down the complex problem into smaller pieces and work back on first principles, on what would good look like, and ask those whys. Why is it so slow? Why can't you get access to the bank settlement account as a non-bank? Why is it that we can't do 24/7 settlement across Asia? Like, all of that had to be broken down into individual components and rebuilt on assumptions and universal truths that you base your product building on. And the tech was just part of it. But it's been truly going back to the basics and working up the first principles in each of these disciplines that has got us to this place. So it's wise to think beyond the code. I guess that's one way to put it. But basically, for me, it's been this first principles thinking that has helped us, and pervasive across organization, that has helped us get us here. So I'll leave you with one story. So one of my good friends, he's a very early product marketing leader at Wise, and we would have these like conversations, and he would say, Harsh, people don't talk about payments or money transfer at the pub. Why don't they? And I was like, it's boring, man. Like, I mean, this lot's going to talk about payments tonight, but like most normal people don't talk about payments at the pub. And he goes, no, it's not because, yeah, it's boring, sure, but we've not done anything to make it exciting. There's nothing to talk about. I think it stands true for any product you build. You will only get advocacy, and advocacy is the best way of growth, right? Like for Wise, 70% of our new users still every month come from word of mouth. That means lower spend on marketing, and actually it's a better product leading to like word of mouth growth and friends telling friends and family. And that is a true hallmark of a great product like that all of us in this room and other engineers want to build. But to truly achieve advocacy for your product, it needs to be just 10x better than the alternative, at least, right? And that's why our pricing is that way. Like, banks charge 5%, we charge 0.5% blended, and we're still profitable, right? But that was the goal we hit. If it's not that good, people won't talk about it. So then the question is, for your industry, what are the challenges that you guys have? And what is the ones that are waiting on first principles thinking? Because if you want to do this, you have to go back to first principles and fundamentally ask the whys on every assumption that's baked in. Because that's only then can you actually build a truly disruptive and a truly different product that leads to people talking about your product in the pub. So then, mostly, this is not technical. It's tech, product engineering, and people and culture. But hopefully, you all have some of those problems where in your products and in your teams, where you see that it's not technical problems, but things beyond. And if you go back to first principles, then you can move them and build a much, much better product that your customers talk about in the pub. Onwards. That's it.